July 3rd, 1944. Luftwaffe night bomber base, northern France. Hauptmann Werner Bach sat in the briefing room with his squadron of Junkers Ju-88 night bombers, receiving intelligence updates about Allied air defences. The intelligence officer, Oberleutnant Klaus Schmidt, was explaining new American night fighter capabilities that had recently appeared over French airspace. The Americans have deployed a new aircraft called the P-61, designated Black Widow, Schmidt explained, pointing to reconnaissance photographs showing a large twin-engine aircraft with distinctive twin-boom design. Intelligence reports suggest this aircraft carries radar for night interception. Bach studied the photographs skeptically. Another radar-equipped night fighter? The British have been using radar night fighters for years with their Beaufighters and Mosquitoes. Schmidt consulted his notes. The P-61 is larger, carries more armament, and supposedly has more advanced radar. But our analysis suggests this is propaganda. Effective airborne radar requires large antennas, powerful transmitters, and sophisticated receivers. These systems are heavy, complex, and require extensive operator training. The Americans have only been in the war 3 years. Around the room, experienced Luftwaffe pilots nodded in agreement. Night fighting was an extremely specialized skill that required years to master. Even with radar assistance, intercepting enemy aircraft in darkness demanded expert navigation, precise flying, and the ability to interpret radar displays that showed confusing and ambiguous information. The idea that Americans, newcomers to night fighting, had fielded effective radar night fighters seemed implausible. Continue operations as normal, Schmidt concluded. If you encounter these American night fighters, evade using standard procedures. What Hauptmann Bach and his fellow Luftwaffe pilots didn't know, what German intelligence had catastrophically failed to understand, was that American airborne radar had leapfrogged British technology through different development approaches and was now the most capable night interception system in the world. The P-61 Black Widow carried SCR-720 radar with detection ranges exceeding 5 miles, display clarity that allowed operators to guide pilots directly onto targets, and integration with the aircraft systems that made night interception routine rather than exceptional. Within 2 weeks, Bake's own squadron would lose 4 aircraft to P-61 night fighters, all shot down in total darkness by an enemy the German pilots never saw, never detected, and couldn't evade despite executing every defensive maneuver they knew. The dismissal in that briefing room would prove fatal for hundreds of Luftwaffe aircrews who continued night operations believing American night fighters were ineffective. Because when your enemy can find you in absolute darkness, track you through evasive maneuvers, close to firing range without visual contact, and destroy you before you know you're under attack, all your skill and experience become irrelevant. The P-61 Black Widow and its SCR-720 radar had turned night fighting from an art requiring exceptional talent into a science that competent crews could execute reliably, and that transformation would prove decisive in establishing American air superiority over Europe during the war's final year. To understand why German pilots found American night fighter capabilities so shocking, we must first examine the state of night fighting in 1944 and the technical challenges that made radar-guided interception extremely difficult even with the best available equipment. Night fighting emerged as a critical capability during the Battle of Britain when German bombers attacked British cities under cover of darkness to avoid daytime fighter interception. British fighters attempting to intercept these night raiders faced seemingly insurmountable challenges. Spotting an enemy aircraft in daylight required sharp eyes and luck. Spotting one in darkness was nearly impossible unless the target was silhouetted against searchlights or happened to pass directly in front of the defending fighter. The solution was airborne radar, radio detection equipment that could locate aircraft by detecting radio waves reflected off their metal structures. British scientists developed the first practical airborne interception radar, designated AI Mark IV, and installed it in Bristol Beaufighter night fighters. This radar could detect aircraft at ranges up to 3 miles under ideal conditions, giving the radar operator enough warning to guide the pilot toward the target until visual contact was possible. But early airborne radar had severe limitations. Detection range was limited by transmitter power and antenna size. The radar displays were primitive, showing targets as blips on small cathode ray tubes with limited information about target altitude, speed, or heading. Interpreting these displays required extensive training and experience. Operators needed to distinguish actual targets from ground returns, weather returns, and electronic noise. Tracking maneuvering targets was extremely difficult because the radar could lose lock if the target turned sharply or changed altitude rapidly. The radar operators, called navigators in British night fighters, needed months of training to become proficient. Even experienced operators frequently lost targets, misidentified returns, or guided pilots toward phantom contacts that didn't exist. The system worked well enough to intercept some German bombers, but the success rate was frustratingly low. Most interception attempts failed because the radar couldn't maintain contact long enough for the pilot to achieve visual acquisition and engage with guns. German night fighters faced similar challenges when they began operating against Allied bomber streams. The Luftwaffe developed its own airborne radar systems, the Liechtenstein series, which performed comparably to British radar with similar limitations. German night fighter pilots became highly skilled at working with their radar operators to achieve interceptions, but success required exceptional crew coordination, experience, and often considerable luck. By 1943, both British and German night fighters had refined their tactics and equipment to achieve reasonable interception rates, but night fighting remained a specialized skill performed by elite units with extensive training. The idea that effective night fighting could be conducted by average crews seemed impossible given the equipment limitations and skill requirements. American night fighter development took a different approach, one that emphasized technical solutions to problems that British and German forces addressed through extensive training and crew skill. Rather than accepting that airborne radar would be difficult to use and requiring elite operators, American engineers designed radar systems intended to be usable by competent but not exceptional crews. The SCR-720 radar developed by the Radiation Laboratory at MIT represented a quantum leap in airborne radar capability. Where British AI radars detected targets at 3 miles, the SCR-720 could detect bomber-sized aircraft at 5 miles or more. More importantly, the display was far more sophisticated than British systems, showing target range, bearing, and relative altitude on clear scopes that operators could interpret with moderate training rather than requiring months of experience. The SCR-720 used separate transmitting and receiving antennas mounted in the P-61's nose, allowing better signal isolation and reduced interference. The transmitter operated at higher power than British systems, while using better receiver design to detect weaker return signals. The radar could track targets in different modes: search mode for detecting aircraft within a wide area, or tracking mode that locked onto a specific target and followed it even through evasive maneuvers. The tracking mode was revolutionary. Once the operator locked the radar onto a target, the system maintained contact automatically, updating target position continuously without requiring constant operator adjustment. The pilot received steering cues on his instrument panel, showing whether to turn left or right, climb or descend to close on the target. This meant the pilot could fly the interception using instruments alone, never looking outside until close enough for visual contact or gun range. The P-61 Black Widow was designed from the beginning as a radar night fighter, unlike British aircraft that were adapted from existing designs. Northrop Aircraft designed the P-61 around the requirement to carry heavy radar equipment, multiple crew members, and substantial armament, while maintaining performance adequate for intercepting bombers. The P-61 was massive for a fighter, measuring 49 feet long with a wingspan of 66 feet. It weighed 22,000 pounds empty and over 32,000 pounds loaded. Twin Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engines, each producing 2,000 horsepower, provided propulsion. Maximum speed was 366 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, not exceptional for a fighter, but adequate for catching bombers. Service ceiling was 33 100 feet, and range was 1,250 miles with external fuel tanks. The aircraft's distinctive twin-boom design placed the engines in nacelles extending rearward, with the tail surfaces mounted between the booms. This configuration kept the engines away from the fuselage, reducing vibration and noise in the crew compartment and allowing the radar antenna to mount in the nose without interference from engine heat or propeller rotation. The central nacelle housed the three-man crew, pilot, radar operator, and gunner. Armament was formidable. 4 20mm cannons mounted in the belly could fire 650 rounds per minute combined, providing devastating firepower at ranges up to 1,000 yards. 50 caliber machine guns, though this was often removed to reduce weight and improve performance. The 20mm cannons alone provided sufficient firepower to destroy bombers with short bursts. The P-61's operational procedure demonstrated how American night fighter tactics differed from British and German approaches. Ground-based radar would detect enemy aircraft and vector P-61s toward the general area. Once within approximately 10 miles, the P-61's SCR-720 radar would begin searching. When the radar operator detected a target, he would guide the pilot toward it using radio directions. As range closed to about 2 miles, the operator would lock the tracking radar onto the target. From this point, the interception became almost automatic. The tracking radar maintained contact regardless of target maneuvers. The pilot followed steering cues on his instruments, closing range while maintaining proper position relative to the target. At about 1,000 yards, the radar operator would call out range and position. The pilot would attempt visual acquisition of the target, which was possible at that range if weather was clear and the target's exhaust was visible. If visual contact couldn't be achieved, the pilot would close to 500 yards and fire using only radar guidance, aiming where the radar indicated the target was located. This procedure didn't require exceptional pilot skill or operator expertise. Competent crews could execute successful interceptions after moderate training. The system's reliability and user-friendliness meant that average pilots could achieve results that British and German night fighters needed expert crews to accomplish. The first combat deployment of P-61 Black Widows occurred in Europe in July 1944, with the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron beginning operations from England. German intelligence was aware that American night fighters had arrived, but assessed them as ineffective based on assumptions that American radar couldn't match British systems and American crews lacked the experience for successful night fighting. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong within days of the P-61's combat debut. On the night of July 15, 1944, Lieutenant Paul Smith and his radar operator, Lieutenant Sam Leahy, flying a P-61 from the 422nd Squadron, were vectored toward a German aircraft detected crossing the English Channel. Leahy acquired the target on radar at 6 miles range, locked the tracking radar at 4 miles, and guided Smith onto an intercept course. The target, a Junkers Ju-88 bomber, was flying at 18,000 feet in complete darkness with no moonlight. The German crew had no idea they were being tracked. At 1,000 yards, Smith caught a glimpse of the Ju-88's exhaust flames and confirmed visual contact. He closed to 400 yards and opened fire with the 20mm cannons. The first burst struck the Ju-88's left engine and wing root. The bomber exploded and fell burning into the channel. Total time from initial radar contact to destruction, 4 minutes. The German crew never knew what hit them. This pattern repeated across dozens of engagements over the following weeks. P-61s would detect German aircraft on radar, close to firing range using radar guidance alone, and destroy targets that often never knew they were under attack until cannon shells started hitting. German pilots who survived these encounters reported being attacked by invisible enemies that appeared without warning, fired with devastating accuracy, and disappeared into the darkness before the German crew could even locate their attacker. Hauptmann Werner Barker experienced this nightmare firsthand on the night of July 23, 1944. His Ju-88 was returning from a bombing mission over Allied positions when his rear gunner suddenly screamed a warning. Before Barker could react, 20mm cannon shells tore through his aircraft's right wing and fuselage. The right engine caught fire immediately. Barquet threw the aircraft into a violent diving turn, standard evasion for night fighter attacks, but more cannon shells struck the aircraft's tail section. He ordered his crew to bail out and followed them into the darkness. Hanging in his parachute, Baek watched his aircraft spiral down in flames. He never saw the attacker. His crew never detected any radar warning. The enemy had found them in total darkness, tracked them through his evasive maneuver, and destroyed his aircraft in seconds. When British troops captured Baek the next morning, he insisted that some new weapon had been used, possibly a guided missile, because no aircraft could have intercepted and destroyed his bomber that quickly in complete darkness. British intelligence officers explained that he had been shot down by an American P-61 night fighter using radar. Baek refused to believe this initially, arguing that radar-guided interception couldn't be that effective. Only after seeing photographs of the P-61 and having the SCR-720 radar system explained to him did he begin to accept that American technology had advanced far beyond what German intelligence had assessed. German Luftwaffe intelligence responded to increasing P-61 successes by issuing warnings to night bomber crews, but the advice was largely useless. Crews were told to watch for American night fighters, to execute evasive maneuvers if attacked, and to request fighter escort when possible. But these recommendations couldn't counter the fundamental problem. The SCR-720 radar allowed P-61s to find targets in conditions where visual detection was impossible, track them through any evasive maneuver, and maintain contact until destruction. The psychological impact on German aircrews was severe. Knowing that invisible enemies could find them in darkness, track them perfectly, and destroy them without warning created paralyzing fear. Many crews refused to fly night missions. Others abandoned missions early, claiming mechanical problems rather than continuing into airspace where American night fighters operated. Mission effectiveness dropped dramatically as German aircrews prioritized survival over mission completion. The technical comparison between American SCR-720 and German Liechtenstein radar revealed why P-61s were so effective. 5 miles and relatively poor display resolution. The operator needed considerable skill to distinguish targets from clutter and to maintain tracking during evasive maneuvers. German night fighter success depended heavily on operator expertise and pilot-operator coordination. SCR-720 radar had detection range of 5+ miles and display clarity that made target identification relatively easy. The automatic tracking mode meant operators didn't need to manually follow targets through maneuvers. The integration with the pilot's instruments allowed instrument-only interceptions. These advantages meant that American crews with moderate training achieved success rates that required elite German crews to match. British night fighter pilots who evaluated the P-61 and SCR-720 system were impressed, but also somewhat frustrated. The British had pioneered airborne radar and night fighting, spending years developing tactics and training crews. Now, Americans arrived with superior equipment that made what British crews had struggled to master relatively easy. A British Mosquito night fighter pilot who flew a P-61 commented, "It's rather like comparing a manual transmission to an automatic." The P-61's effectiveness extended beyond pure interception capability. The aircraft's size allowed it to carry substantial fuel, giving it endurance to patrol for hours, waiting for targets. The twin engines provided redundancy. If one engine was damaged, the aircraft could return on the remaining engine. The heavy armament meant that even brief firing opportunities could destroy targets. The 3-man crew reduced individual workload, with pilot, radar operator, and gunner, each focusing on specific duties rather than one person trying to do everything. Production of the P-61 was limited compared to day fighters. Northrop built 706 aircraft between 1943 and 1945. This was a tiny fraction of the 15,000 plus P-51 Mustangs, or 12,000 plus P-47. Thunderbolts produced, but night fighters were specialized equipment needed in smaller quantities. The 706 P-61s equipped night fighter squadrons in Europe, the Pacific, and the Mediterranean, providing 24-hour air defense capability that complemented day fighter operations. In the Pacific Theater, P-61s hunted Japanese night raiders attempting to bomb Allied airfields and supply bases. Japanese aircraft lacked radar warning receivers and had no defense against radar-guided interception. P-61 crews achieved even higher success rates against Japanese aircraft than against German targets because Japanese pilots were completely unprepared for enemies that could find them in darkness. One notable Pacific engagement occurred on the night of August 14, 1945, hours before Japan's surrender announcement. A P-61 from the 548th Night Fighter Squadron intercepted and shot down a Japanese bomber attacking Okinawa. This was likely the last American aerial victory of World War II, achieved using radar in darkness against an enemy that never saw his attacker. The post-war interrogation of German night bomber crews revealed the psychological damage inflicted by American night fighters. Crews described the terror of knowing that invisible enemies could find them anywhere, at any altitude, in any weather condition. Many reported that the stress of night operations under constant threat of radar-guided interception was more psychologically damaging than daylight missions, where at least you could see threats approaching. Oberst Heinrich Prinz zu Sein-Wittgenstein, a highly decorated Luftwaffe night fighter ace with 83 confirmed victories, was himself shot down and killed by a British Mosquito night fighter in January 1944, before American P-61s entered combat. His death illustrated that even expert German night fighter crews were vulnerable to radar-equipped enemies. The arrival of P-61s with superior radar made this vulnerability universal, affecting both expert and novice crews equally. The technical development of the SCR-720 radar represented American engineering approaching problems differently than European counterparts. British radar development emphasized making the best possible equipment using available technology, accepting that the equipment would be difficult to use and require expert operators. German radar development followed similar philosophy. American radar development, influenced by industrial engineering principles, emphasized making equipment that was easy to use and could be operated effectively by personnel with moderate training. This reflected American military doctrine that valued systems accessible to average soldiers rather than requiring elite specialists. The SCR-720's automatic tracking, clear displays, and integrated steering cues made it a system that any competent crew could use effectively rather than requiring months of specialized training. This philosophy extended throughout American military technology. The Norden bomb sight, the M1 Garand rifle, the Jeep, Liberty ships, all reflected design emphasis on usability by average personnel rather than requiring exceptional operators. American industry could produce enough equipment to provide every unit with adequate tools, and American training could produce competent operators in large numbers but couldn't create elite specialists as quickly. Therefore, equipment needed to work well for average users. The P-61 Black Widow's operational legacy extended beyond World War II. The aircraft served in the Korean War as a night intruder, attacking ground targets and providing close air support in darkness. Some P-61s were converted to F-15 reporter photo reconnaissance aircraft, serving into the 1950s. The lessons learned from P-61 operations influenced all subsequent American night fighter development, from the F-94 Starfire through the F-89 Scorpion to modern aircraft like the F-15E Strike Eagle that perform night operations using advanced radar and sensors descended from the SCR-720's concepts. Today, only 4 P-61 Black Widows survive. One is displayed at the National Air and Space Museum, partially restored. Others are in various stages of restoration at military museums. These aircraft represent an important chapter in aviation history, demonstrating how advanced radar technology transformed night fighting from an elite specialty into a capability that competent crews could perform reliably. The story of German pilots refusing to believe American radar could enable effective night interception, then being systematically hunted and destroyed by P-61s they couldn't detect or evade, illustrates a recurring theme of World War II. American technology often achieved capabilities that enemies dismissed as impossible or propaganda until combat experience proved otherwise. The acoustic homing torpedoes, Liberty ship production rates, medical evacuation systems, and countless other American innovations followed the same pattern of enemy disbelief followed by combat validation. When Hauptmann Werner Barker sat in that briefing room in July 1944 and heard his intelligence officer dismiss American night fighter capabilities as ineffective, he was receiving analysis based on assumptions that American technology couldn't match British development and American crews lacked sufficient experience. Both assumptions were wrong. American technology had surpassed British systems through different engineering approaches, and American training methods could produce competent crews rapidly enough to field effective night fighter squadrons within months of beginning operations. Bake's subsequent shoot-down by a P-61 he never saw, his refusal to believe radar could enable such effective interception, and his eventual acceptance after capture that American technology had advanced beyond German assessment represented the experience of hundreds of Luftwaffe aircrews who learned too late that their intelligence had catastrophically underestimated American capabilities. The P-61 Black Widow and its SCR-720 radar proved that night fighting could be transformed from an art requiring exceptional talent into a science that competent crews could execute reliably. That transformation gave American forces 24-hour air superiority, denying enemies the sanctuary of darkness and proving that American technology could solve problems that others addressed through elite training and specialist selection. The Germans refused to believe it until P-61s found them in total darkness and destroyed them before they understood they were under attack. By then, belief was irrelevant. The night skies belonged to America.